I am pleased to introduce Katie Lautar. She took the helm of Baltimore Green Space after 7 years working as a program director. Born and raised in Baltimore, she came to this work through her love of Baltimore, nature, and communities. Katie has more than 16 years of experience in community organization, designing nonprofit programs, and creating educational programs. She earned a master's degree in environmental education from Lesley University while living outdoors in different bioregions. She earned her bachelor degree at Goucher College in elementary education with a minor in peace studies. Please join me in welcoming Katie, talking to us today about Baltimore Green Space.
Today, I'm going to talk to you about, I like to have action words, so assess, advocate, action, forest patch health, and engagement over time. So as mentioned before, I'm the executive director of Baltimore Green Space. Baltimore Green Space is a conservation land trust for community managed green spaces. We preserve community gardens, pocket parks, and forest patches, and we also teach people how to care for forests. In tandem with this, we conduct advocacy work that supports leaders caring for green spaces and or protects the green spaces themselves. Next slide. So I want to pause here and say a little bit of thanks to our funder, because funders, or some of them, and partners, because none of our work happens without them or happens well without them. So our forest work is funded by the U.S. Forest Service, the Chesapeake Bay Trust, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and some of this work is funded by the EPA, the Department of Public Works, and our partners are one of our strongest partners is UMBC. Next slide. So whenever I talk about our work at Baltimore Green Space, I always start with the context of Baltimore. So Baltimore happens to be the place where historic redlining practices of disinvestment, deliberate disinvestment in Black communities occurred in history, and that racist policy continues to affect our landscape today, and it is the backdrop of our landscape. And just to illustrate how strongly that backdrop is still on our landscape today, this is the redlining map. And this is the map of vacant houses and properties, which almost completely overlays with that map still today. And this is the map of, oh, sorry, I didn't tell you to change slides, but I'm changing slides in my mind. So change the next slide. Sorry, that's the redlining map. If you could change to the next slide. And this is the vacant properties map. Next slide. And this is the historic food desert map. And you can see they overlay one for one, and that policy still bears out currently on the landscape. The good news about that, if there could be some good news, is next slide. That is also where there are over 400 green spaces on land that can be bought and sold, which neighbors care for and created. And of those spaces, over 100 of them are over 5 years old, which is the threshold for preservation at our land trust. So neighbors have filled in the gap of services with a legacy of consistent care and the creation of these green spaces. Baltimore has one of the strongest green space movements in the country, but you wouldn't know it from the news. We collect data on these green spaces, and there, as I said, there are over 400 where we know leaders, and there's actually even more than that where we don't have the strong leader connections yet, but there is a map of them. So if you want to see a even more comprehensive map of the green spaces in Baltimore, you can look up Project Vital Map. It's a Bloomberg study that is mapping the green spaces, but is also going to look at how green spaces affect youth and youth health over time. And so that's a longer term study, but part of that study has been a mapping project. Next slide. So when residents turn blighted vacant lots into gardens or say a horseshoe pit, they beautify their neighbors, the neighborhoods create social cohesion and increase property values. This is the pit, one of the first spaces we ever protected. This is Brentwood Commons. It's a pocket park behind North Avenue and Greenmount, if you know anything about Baltimore. This is a food garden for elders. Right now, we protect 20 spaces, soon to be 21. We have 8 food gardens, 6 pocket parks, 2 farms, 2 forests, 1 wildlife refuge, and 1 horseshoe pit. And it's over 62 acres of protected land. But we also work with 10 to 15 forests a year. And how did we get involved with forest patches? Well, the answer is, next slide. Let me see, I just realized you're still. Okay. No, but can you go back? Back one more. Okay, so we all of our work welcomed by neighbors or requested by neighbors. So there were about 3 different neighborhoods that came to us around the same time asking us, what is there? Can you help us protect our forest patch? Can you tell us more about this patch? So next slide. And this is Charles Brown. And he is one of the leaders at Wilson Woods. And Charles came to us both asking us to help with his woods, but also wanted to know if there was anything we could do to help with 2 lots that were in danger of being developed of his community forest. So next slide. This is a picture of the house. You'll see a circle where the landowner bought the 2 lots right behind his house, and they are kind of at the edge of the forest patch. And the neighbors wanted to know if there was any way we could stop him from clearing those lots. Next slide. The answer is we couldn't. At the time, the forest conservation triggers were too high. They were 20,000 square feet of disturbance. This was just under 20,000 square feet. And we scoured all the regulations and we learned he wasn't doing anything wrong by regulation. He cleared every tree but an ash tree. And I'm sure most of you know that the ash trees then got attacked by the emerald ash borer. And if you go to the next slide, this is what the result was. This area is over 10 degrees hotter, even in the winter. And now you could see all the topsoil has washed away. But that got us asking, how many places like this in Baltimore exist but are vulnerable to development? Next slide. So our first analysis, so we started doing an analysis of the forest patches in Baltimore. We worked with the UMBC and the Department of, we worked with UMBC, the Office of Sustainability, and the U.S. Forest Service to consider how many patches there were, to look at the full scope of where their vulnerabilities were and regulations. And this is when we began to raise alarms about the urban forest conservation triggers and how they were set too high. And it's also when we learned that 20% of Baltimore's tree canopy is in forest patches outside of parks on land that can be bought and sold. Next slide. So simultaneously, We were working with neighbors. So we do analysis, but we work with neighbors. And so our very first meeting, we held the Forest Stewardship Network meeting in 2012. When the leaders from all of those communities came to us, we convened a meeting with them and all of the nonprofit partners and agency partners that we could think of that might be able to help them troubleshoot issues with their forests. We call this the Forest Stewardship Network. It still meets quarterly. And the whole foundation of our program is based on these meetings, and they still happen today. This is a meeting where we foster a learning community between neighbors, partnership experts, and they all plan together and think together and troubleshoot forest patches together. In the forest patch programming side of our work, we try to make sure that all of the work is a balance between, next slide, things that can help with the care of the forest, such as villainous vines trainings, where it's still going. I didn't realize it had an automatic advance. Villainous vines training, where folks learn how to remove the vines from the trees. We have a particular strategy we use for villainous vines trainings that is hyper locally based. Next slide. And we balance these out with things like bird walks that are going to help neighbors figure out what to love about their forest. Next slide. We also do trail work with neighbors and trail maintenance, but they teach us as much as we teach them. So once forest stewards have been taking care of their patches for a long enough time, they operate completely independently of us, and they end up knowing way more about their local forest patches than we do. Next slide. And of course, the age-old need of forest patches is trash removal. But I always like to tell people that there's nothing that brings community together faster than having the problem of trash to troubleshoot. It is a real community builder. Next slide. To support the stewards that we work with, we've developed a set of steward kits that get brought to forest stewards at the beginning of each season. Next slide. The steward kits include everything from native seed mixes for forest floor replanting to tools, plant guides, rubbing alcohol for removing poison ivy, oils, contractor bags, sunscreen, gloves, insect repellent, etc. Next slide. But everything that we do with forest stewards, and as we are moving through teaching them different things or getting different requests from the forest stewards, we consolidate into educational learning tools. So you can go online and look up Forest Patch First Aid and Baltimore Green Space, and you will find the first step guides to provide a neighbor with everything they would need to think about how to start getting involved with their forest. It has everything from helping them think about what kind of forest management that they're interested in, to poison ivy guides, etc. It has also a whole set of just teaching about the basics of forest ecology. Next slide. So just so that you can get a sense of the impact that our team has, last year we hosted 44 events, reaching 841 participants. We cleaned up 222 bags of trash, removed 252 bags of invasive vines, and removed invasives from 5.4 acres of forested lands, with only one forest manager leading volunteer crews and forest stewards. We also have 27 scientists that work in partnership with us to advise us on different matters, and the stewards on different matters, and to teach us various things. And we planted over 2,000 plants. Next slide. Before I move on past the Forest Stewardship Network and how it operates and how we operate it, I just wanted to provide a little bit of an opportunity for you guys to ask questions about how we engage community, and or why we chose the strategy that we did. When we first started doing this work, everyone was like, well, urban forests, they're going to be completely invaded and nothing but ailanthus trees and have nothing to offer. And nobody pictures what you see before you. You see this healthy forest with the layers and the old white oak trees. This is a forest patch in Baltimore. It's 5 acres. When foresters walk into this forest, they always ask us if it's a forest remnant, meaning having never been clear cut. And we have to tell them, no, it's not a forest remnant. This was cleared at one point because we have the 1927 data, historical data layer, and we did look at it. This is a second growth forest, and it is over 100 years old, and it is very healthy. Next slide. But we also have patches like this. This is also a forest patch in Baltimore, and it is overrun with porcelainberry and English ivy and wisteria, and the forest there is in extreme danger of complete decline. Next slide. As I mentioned, we did this analysis, and when we did the analysis, not only did we look at the regulations, but we looked at the ownership regimes of the forest patches that we mapped. But the first thing that we did was we mapped them using GIS, and then we went and we ground truthed them. So next slide. So it's actually true that more than 20% of Baltimore's tree canopy is in forest patches outside of parks. This is an older canopy layer. Our tree canopy has increased, but our tree canopy is really in danger because a lot of our forest canopy can be developed. Next slide. So as part of this mapping strategy, so we learned that there were over 2,000 forest patches, and so far we've done 110 total on the ground surveys, but we first started with some really quick ground truthing surveys where we kind of go in, see what the dominant species are, see whether there are seedling presence, identify whether there's a stream, etc. So we did that with 88 throughout the city, so we could kind of look at this mapping strategy we were using and see if it was actually truing up to have mostly forest or if we were going to see trees over grass, etc. And the strategy is pretty good. Next slide. So what we learned when we went to the first 88 was that there were 73% of them had seedlings present. And that's unusual because in the county, there's so much deer pressure. So like everybody expected us not to have any seedlings at all, no natural forest succession, but we do. We have natural seedlings coming up, and that's what a healthy forest should have. And 32% showed 32% of them had a water feature. Next slide. We've identified over 98 species of birds at this point, including lots of forest interior dwellers. So we were also told that we weren't going to find forest interior dwellers in 5 acres or under 5 acres, and we have documented them in 2.5 acres. That was an Acadian flycatcher in the picture before this, and we've documented a lot of them in the patches. We also heard a lot that like folks in cities don't like nature or they don't want to be in forests. And so we documented that as well. So 74% of the first 88 we went into showed signs of human access points. So there was an opening that people were using. 52% showed signs of use, like clear pathways that were being used very regularly, and 36% showed signs of stewardship. And when we say stewardship, we mean signs like trash cans, signage, some plantings. Next slide. And just to re-emphasize this, that in urban areas, people care about their forest. When we produced our first forest patch report and analysis for neighbors to talk about the health of their forest patch, we did a door knocking strategy. Can you go back one? We did a door knocking strategy. We went around walking around with the forest patch report, which you'll see some examples of in a few slides from now. And this is how many people came out to hear. All we did was say the U.S. Forest Service, we're bringing the U.S. Forest Service out to come out and talk about your forest patch report. And we waved the report around and we handed the report out. And over 34 people came out on that day. I had to yell like a megaphone about what the U.S. Forester was saying so the people in the back could hear me. It was that Occupy Wall Street strategy, if you know of it. So anyway, next slide. So we kept getting from neighbors, well, there were, as the work progressed, it became really clear to us we needed to understand the health of the forest patches. And first we tried to call the state forester to see if they could come out and do forest management plans. And that's when we learned you can't get a forest management plan on lands you have no ownership over, but just have permission to be on. And also they don't love to do forest management plans on things that are under 5 acres, although we did work with some patches that were over 5 acres. And the other thing we were getting is this question of like, can we protect these places in the trust? And so as a responsible land trust, we wanted to understand what we needed to know about the health of the forest in order to consider protecting forest patches. And those two needs combined, the needs of the neighbors to understand where they should focus their efforts, what they should worry about with the health of their forest, what beautiful, valuable things they have in their forest, and the need to think about how healthy does a forest need to be to protect it. We developed a forest patch health protocol in conjunction, again, with UMBC, U.S. Forest Service, Johns Hopkins University, the Johns Hopkins University Center for Social Concerns, and the Maryland Natural History Society were our deep partners in designing this protocol. And we chose to design a rapid sampling protocol in order to characterize the full forest instead of just parts of it. Next slide. And actually, you can look that up. I made it into an educational module, so anybody else can reproduce it. And again, UMBC helped with that. So for each forest patch of neighbors that we work with, we produced a full forest report. And it's, I don't know how many pages they all are, but they're lots of pages. Next slide. So that's when we, over time now, we have 47 forests. We've done this really comprehensive forest patch analysis in. Next slide. So we start by putting down a grid in order to establish the points where they're going to do the analysis. Next slide. And at each point, we perform a protocol. We use the Cruiser Prism protocol. Hold on, I want to actually read this very carefully for you because Shane and Olivia did such a great job at putting it together. You got to get to the slide though. So we use a Cruiser Prism to establish relative. Trying to get to the slide on my notes. Okay, so if you're a forester, you use this tool regularly. The way it works is you hold it up to your eye, and if the tree is not lined up or touching in any way with itself, it's not the right DBH to count in the sample set. And then if it actually touches, we count that tree, we identify the tree, and then we also go to the next slide. Characterize the invasion of each tree. So this is the Schumacher invasion scale. It's something that we designed because, and this was back in 2015, It's something we designed because none of the protocols at the time had when they're characterizing invasion of a forest, it didn't include invasion of the canopy. Each one of those, a vine could be completely invading the whole top of a forest, but register as one stem. And so that's why we established this canopy invasion scale. It's a 1 to 5 scale with a 2A and a 3A, because sometimes it kind of, the vines can come sideways and not actually crawl the tree. So next slide. At each meter square, we also do a ground cover invasion scale where we identify the native and invasive species in the meter square. And just in case you weren't clear, that we have seedlings you see in the left-hand corner, those are willow oak seedlings. Next slide. We also do a soil health assessment where we do a soil profile, we grab a soil core. When we first started this work, we were told, you are not going to find healthy soils in your forest patches. Well, the reason we were looking at soils, though, is because we wanted to be able to speak to the soil's ability to manage stormwater. And we thought that looking at soils would be the best way to do this. And at the time, next slide, it probably shows you a profile, I think. Yes. So if you know anything about soil science, you already know that the O layer is the healthiest layer. Then you get down to the next one, and it's A, and that is not as healthy as the O layer, but it's still great. And the further and further you get down, it's not going to have as much of organic matter content, and it's not as healthy. And we were told you are going to be lucky if you find an A layer in any of your forests. And what we saw is that every single forest we analyzed had an A layer, and some of them had an O layer. And that means they're going to be better at filtering stormwater. And there's other things that speak to that, but we can talk about that later. Next slide. Just another picture of the soil cores. We also characterize the soil horizon. And I just love this picture. Next slide. So this is just, again, we have good organic matter in the patches. This is just another way of showing you that. Next slide. We were able to definitively tell people that we have more than 85% native tree canopy in almost every patch we went into, with the exception of Belvedere Park that had really strong development pressure. And that was in 22 forests that we analyzed in those 2 years. Next slide. And as you know, it's really important that each of these different native tree species support different native wildlife. And so the royal walnut moth and larva and the hickory horn devil really require certain, I don't have my notes on my slide, this particular slide. I'm sorry, y'all. But anyway, you get the point. They're important to these species. Next slide. And to forest interior dwellers, as we already talked about, and various different species of birds. Next slide. Questions? So anytime we do any type of analysis, we do it so partially to also support advocacy. So when we first started doing our analysis of the policies that protected trees in Baltimore, we learned that the forest conservation triggers were too high. So they were 20,000 square feet in an urban area, and we needed to drop them down. We wanted to drop them down to 10,000 square feet. And we started talking to everybody about this. But at the very beginning, we also started inventoried model regulations so we could dream about what would be the best regulations to protect our tree canopy. And then we gathered an interagency committee and relevant nonprofit leaders to think about this together. And we decided that the first place to start was to inventory all the current regulations in Baltimore to see if there were some easy fixes to update beyond the 20,000 square feet trigger for forest conservation regulations. Next slide. So the state of Maryland has one of the strongest forest conservation protections and regulations in the country. But the conservation triggers, as I mentioned, were set at 20,000 square feet of disturbance. We wanted to bring it down to 10. And at first, everybody was like, there's no way you're going to be able to do this. Well, you're looking at the bill that we were able to pass in 2018 with partners, and we were able to get the trigger down to 5,000 square feet of disturbance, and we were able to also update all the mitigation fees. And so this was a success that working with neighbors and supporting their needs was able to change the law, and it has been enacted. Next slide. The second approach that we took is that in the public property trees, there was a policy they were implementing that had really strong mitigation rates for, thanks, that had really strong, they have this policy on parkland where they're mitigating at a 1-to-1 replacement requirement, and they're mitigating any tree that's 8 inches diameter if it gets harmed in a development project or, when there's a utility project. But it was a policy and not a law. And so we realized that since it was a policy, it could be challenged, they could get a different administration and have a completely different policy. And so what we did was worked with that department to make sure they codified that law. And this is a huge group of partners that did this. And we kind of have been the driving force of kind of keeping it going from behind the scenes. And so we were able to pass that. Last week, it got signed into law. And what's our next move? Next slide. To make sure that this rec and parks policy is over all publicly owned forested land. Right now, it's only on parklands. So we chose not to do it at once because we knew it's an election year and it's going to be a little harder to get this policy over all the departments passed. Next slide. Questions about our policy work? Remember when I told you we started with the forest health assessments? The question then became, is this working? How is this helping? And last year, we were able to complete our first round of secondary reviews of the same exact patches that stewards have been working in over time. And here's the results of that. Next slide. So what we're learning is that, let's see, you're looking on the first side. So remember the Schumacher invasion scale I told you about is the canopy terribly invaded? That's what it shows you. So on the left-hand side, you'll see an image of where it's red and orange. Anywhere it's red and orange, it's almost if it's red, it's in the canopy and threatening to block out the light from those trees. If it's orange, it's close to being in the canopy. Well, you can see in the 2022 slide that now it's getting yellow because this neighborhood at Still Meadow was able to address getting the vines almost off of almost all of their trees. And now it's mostly focusing on the ground layer that needs to happen. And you can see so if it's yellow, it means it's kind of at the base of the tree. And then if it's blue or green, that means it's like there's no vines or almost no vines. Next slide. So what we're seeing is you can see a general trend in that canopy invasion is going down across most sites. And where it's not been going down actually is where they lost a steward for some reason. Next slide. So these are the sites with active stewardship, and this is the canopy profile, the canopy invasion profile of sites with active stewardship. You can see in each case, it's gone significantly down. Next slide. What we're also seeing is an increase in diversity, both at the canopy layer and the ground cover layer over the span of time where there has been stewardship invasive removal focus. Next slide. Oh, these are the dominant species of the sites that we analyzed last year, white oaks. Next slide. Or like if you click it, it's going to show you another tree. Tulip poplars, and there's some sassafras in there. Next slide. But there also are some invasives. So this is the Norway maple. Next slide. And the ailanthus. Ta-da. Next slide. Oh, and dun dun dun. This new crazy bug, the oriental. I forgot its name, guys. You know it though. Next slide. Okay. So again, this is the canopy. We're looking at the canopy composition, and you'll see that in only a few cases, this is of native or invasive spotted lanternfly. Thank you. Sorry, the field crew does these presentations more than I do these days. Okay, so remember when I told you we've got more than 85% native tree canopy? And so what you're looking at here is where it's pink, it's non-native, and where it's green, it's native. And you'll see from 2016 to 2021 and 2023, there's only a few places in which the invasive species has increased. And that is in spaces where there was an extreme loss from the emerald ash borer and or extreme pressure from invasive bamboo. Next slide. Similarly to the canopy invasion, we're seeing progress in the ground cover invasion. Stewards make a huge difference. So you're looking at the red again, and the orange is like, whoa, danger, the ground cover is almost overwhelmed. And then when you get to be yellow and green, it's getting healthier and healthier. So you can see that there's a really big difference between the start and where we are now because of active and engaged stewardship. Next slide. This is another example. So Still Meadow has a lot more community members focusing on its property because it's a congregation that has access to a lot of volunteer structures. But this is Fairwood Forest that is mostly community neighbors and volunteer support that we've been able to leverage to them. And what you see here is some blue spots, which is where, and yellow spots, which is where those stewards live closest to. And then you can see we are still having, so the stewards are making a difference here, though not as drastic of a difference as the church that has a lot more access to volunteers. Next slide. So let's see, we are seeing across the board, the invasives, we've been able to make an impact in the invasive removal. It hasn't changed drastically on the ground cover for how much invasive coverage. It's the species we've been able to impact. And so it's different species that are occupying the space. And we're seeing an increase in native species at the ground cover. Next slide. So this is where I like to pause and say, with Baltimore, an urban forest, but I believe forests everywhere are suffering from lack of ground cover management. And well, at least in urban environments, the invasive species at the ground layer is so intense that without active management, the forests are at risk of not having natural forest succession. which means there's going to be no canopy to replace the canopy that is aging out if there is not some official intervention. And this is causing a loss of species, of habitat. It's going to can escalate climate change, and cause air quality degradation, water quality degradation, and in the long run will increase heat-related deaths. Next slide. So what we're doing related to that is we're training what I refer to as the forest force, but we are training several different forest management programs in how to remove invasive vines, how to do replanting strategies, how to do some edge strategies. We've successfully advocated for forest management credit in the MS4 permitting process. And we also added it to the statewide forest conservation legislation, so you can get credit or mitigation funding can be used to care for forests. And we're also raising awareness with groups like you. Next slide. So let's see. This is just to illustrate, we're actually, we still have a high layer of invasives on the ground, and English ivy is the #1 invader. I think there's a slide about that next. But we are actually seeing more diversity at the ground layer and the canopy layer over time, even though this is true. Next slide. Okay, biggest invaders. Next, if you click, it'll show you. English ivy, #1. Winter creeper, #2. Garlic mustard, #3. Japanese honeysuckle. Ta-da! I think you can, and porcelain berry. There we have it. But I like to be able to definitively say that English ivy is a huge problem. And that's actually across all 54 of the forest patches we've done this analysis in. Next slide. Here's some more examples of the native species that we are able to document. Just to give some examples. Next slide. But we're also seeing some special species, like native winter creeper, sawtooth goldenrod, and the ghost pipe. And if we're not actually identifying what is on the ground layer of our forest, how can we say we know what we have to protect? Next slide. Questions there? Okay, next slide. We're also using forest restoration as a strategy to help stewards as we protected our first forest patch in 2018. We also were able to fund formal restoration of the most invaded zone with a contractor company. We worked with Save a Tree for our first restoration, and we're hoping to bring the forest to a little bit better baseline so that it will have so the stewards will have more ability to manage it themselves. Next slide. This is just showing some of the progress there, some of the native species that are coming back. Next slide. Just to re-emphasize, when stewards, so during COVID, we lost some beloved stewards. They passed away. We had some stewards who were more afraid to work in their forests. And was the result is that there was a bigger invasion in those forests than in the other forests. Next slide. I think it's just going to re-emphasize this for you in case you were wondering, stewardship really matters. Next slide. We had one instance where it was surprising to us how rapidly forest was being overcome by bamboo. And even though it looks like there's not that much canopy invasion, if you look at some of the maps, it ends up the ground cover invasion has so much bamboo. This forest is declining more rapidly than we even imagined. Next slide. It has no stewardship at this time. And this is where you can see the bamboo species is like, whoa. Okay, next slide. Okay, we hear this a lot. I don't know, somebody wrote a paper that said forests that are healthy manage themselves. And maybe that is true in a rural area, but in urban environments, we know from experience and documentation that it is not true. This is the first, remember the first forest I showed you that had that beautiful picture of how healthy it was? This is Het Park. And you can see that it doesn't have any canopy invasion in 2016 on the left-hand side. And its stewards stopped stewarding their space. And in 2022, what you see is now this space is getting invaded. So this healthy forest is not taking care of itself in urban environments with complicated disturbance regimes. We need more support for stewardship. Next slide. Questions about that? So we use this knowledge and this data to actually produce local field guides and share. We always work to share the data that we have with the community. This is a constantly iterative and reciprocal process. Next slide. So when we were working in Springfield Woods and they were the only forest that had Chinese yam, we produced a sheet that taught them about that invasive, and so that they were able to identify and remove it. Next slide. Similarly, they have jewelweed there because they have a spring and a wet soils, and we were able to talk to them about this special native species that has been drawing hummingbirds to their space. Next slide. And like I said, we share these guides with communities so that they can use them in action. Next slide. Baltimore's forests are very diverse. Forest stewardship works, and restoration helps to support community efforts. Next slide. Eric Fischel is currently the forest manager that runs all this on the ground stuff. I used to do it before I became the executive director, but now he has taken the helm and he's doing amazing leadership. Next slide. One of those strategies that we are experimenting with right now is using native species, is doing an invasive removal strategy at the edge and then repopulating with native plugs and native seed mixes based on a curated list and chosen species by neighbors. We'll let you know what happens. There are already some good results. Next slide. We put up little signs that say caution, baby plants are growing here. Next slide. And last season, we saw an increase both in the jewelweed and in the hummingbird species. Like 10 hummingbirds all at the edge. So far, we've done this analysis, the rapid sampling protocol, and 47 patches. We have 845 points of data. And this project has been running for 9 years of summers with amazing fellows, interns, partners, stewards, scientists, and staff. Next slide. But the takeaway from the analysis of the 54 is even more interesting. What we were talking about before was the stewarded sites, but when we look at the 54 spaces that we've done the analysis in, 50% of the sampling points were entirely native trees, and 90% of the points consisted of more than 75% native trees. Next slide. We think it's important for cities to know their places. And now we can talk about our forest patches, talking about the species that dominate those regions. We actually can talk about the canopy types that there are. So Baltimore's overstory canopy was dominated by early successional tulip poplar, followed by the state tree of white oak, and it has understory of northern oak and red maple and green ash. Next slide. What we're also learning is there's a very specific point at which the edge species end and the interior species begin. And so it's about 50 meters from the edge the interior species start. And this has real forest management planning implications for thinking about forest care in urban environments and beyond. Next slide. Somehow amid the climate change era, everyone is talking about planting trees, but almost no one is talking about protecting existing forested land, urban forest patches or otherwise. This is a grave error. Next slide. Because why? Because heat is the #1 killer in climate change. Next slide. And forest patches are better at cooling than any other canopy type. Next slide. Dr. Matt Baker and Dr. Mike Alonso, and there's another scientist on this paper, but who I've forgotten, but they did an analysis looking at canopy types: street trees, trees over grass, forest patches. Forest patches are the best at cooling at all times of the day. Next slide. So we wanted to know if healthier patches were better at cooling than degraded patches. And we worked on a partnership with the Natural Areas Conservancy to look at forest patches in different cities, and we were one of them. And in our healthy forest patch versus our degraded forest patch, there is at least a 6 degrees difference in temperature. It's hotter in degraded forests. Next slide. So healthier forests are better at cooling. Here's another example of that. Some other data from Gwynns Falls Leakin Park. Now, Fairwood Forest is a very linear patch, so it will matter the forest configuration. Next slide. So why we want people to think about conservation, and in order to think about conservation, you have to think about what it's easiest to conserve. So in Baltimore, where we have over 2,000 forest patches, to help our city think about how to conserve, we wanted to look at what it would be easiest, what's the oldest forest, what it would be easiest to protect, et cetera. So we needed to look at the historical data with Dr. Nancy Santi and Dr. Matt Baker and John LaGrossa. They did an analysis looking at the history of patches and whether they were forested before. Next slide. And what they learned is more than 54% of our patches have been persistent forests and they are over 100 years old. So that gives us some place to start to say that if you wanted to start thinking about what to protect, maybe protect what is oldest first, because it's most likely to be healthier is some of our thinking. Next slide. And then this is just kind of highlighting what was shown as vegetation succession versus development conversion. Next slide. You can keep going. So what we want folks to consider is thinking about landscape level conservation planning as it relates to forested land. And we're going to be looking at thinking about what's the highest value for conservation based on age, based on composition, and based on having the least number of owners, so ease of transfer. Next slide. Just want to thank our partners again. I don't know, I told you guys a lot of stuff at once. I hope it's helpful. But thank you, NIFWIF, CBT, EPA, U.S. Forest Service, UMBC, and most importantly, our forest stewards. Next slide.